I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, the hoopla over the Vatican's recognition of the Palestinian State, and reports that Pope Francis referred to Palestine leader Mahmoud Abbas as the angel of peace. I've spoken to Jews lately who are very upset that the Vatican would endorse the Palestinian State and call Abbas an angel of peace. And I've spoken to Jews who think Pope Francis deserves enormous credit for moving the peace process forward. So what is the significance of the Vatican's recognition of the Palestinian State? Does it affect the State of Israel or the peace process? For some insight, we're so pleased to have on our phones once again the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, Malcolm Hoenlein. Malcolm, thank you for joining us.
As always, it's my pleasure.
Okay, Malcolm, I want your overall reaction to the response, I'm sure you've heard it too, in the Jewish community, responding to what seems to be a change in Vatican policy. And I guess I'll begin there. Malcolm, to what extent has there been any change in Vatican policy vis-a-vis a Palestinian state?
When the United Nations named the PA, the Palestinian Authority, as a non-member observer state, the Vatican then in 2012 essentially recognized it already.
In 2012.
Right. And what they did now was to sign an agreement in which they referred to it as the State of Palestine that was played up as recognition. And in fact, the people in the Vatican said, well, we already did. This is just, further along the same track, but it is an elevation. And then came the story about the Pope referring to Abbas as Prince of Peace. He did not say that, actually. What he said was that he should be or could be a Prince of Peace.
The actual quote was, "May you be an angel of peace."
Right, and depending on the translation you read and you get, it certainly did not say that he is an angel of peace.
Exactly.
And so I think that we should put that aside and look at what is the significance and why is there objection, as has been expressed by across the board, to this move. And the answer is that it's further to Abbas's efforts to gain recognition from as many entities in Europe as possible, as many countries in Europe as possible, in order to avoid negotiations. What he's seeking is to get recognition and to build the record so that he can avoid direct negotiations with Israel and hopefully be able to force the concessions without having to negotiate, without having to make concessions himself, without sitting down in the process of give and take, which is the way you build a meaningful negotiations process. These steps, his efforts to gain recognition, whether it's at the United Nations, in international fora, or by states, is a means to demean that process, to avoid that process. And so we think that it's detrimental because it in fact contradicts what the Vatican and others have said, which they want to see, which is direct negotiations and a meaningful peace agreement.
Is there a practical consequence for the State of Israel?
And there's no immediate consequence.
Right.
The consequence is that a country and a leader, that the leader of a so-called non-state, but who gets recognition as if it is a state, bypasses the process by which it achieves the qualities of a state, and engages with a neighbor to come to terms that will have them live side by side, as everybody talks about two states side by side. But you're going not to have them side by side, but in constant competition and in constant tension if the process leads to the imposition or the intervention by others rather than the two sides organically developing a process and over time creating the conditions for peace.
Malcolm, I want you to respond to something that was said to me. I'd love our audience to hear how you would have responded. I'm talking to a very lovely, committed Jew, committed to the State of Israel. But he believes that Israel has been intransigent when it comes to the peace process. And he asked me, what was my reaction to the report that the Vatican had now recognized the State of Israel as if it were a departure. Your point is well taken. It is a step along the way, but this is nothing new. It began in 2012 for the Vatican. But his question to me was, how do you feel about it? And when I said to him, it troubles me, and it troubles me for the very reason you articulated. It does nothing to further bilateral negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. It is really an end run around the State of Israel. And I said to him, so it upsets me. His comment, Malcolm, was, he was surprised. He said, I think it's wonderful. Israel must stop its occupation of the West Bank. And Malcolm, I was taken aback, because whether the Vatican does or does not recognize the Palestinian state, that does not immediately impact whether there will or will not be an Israeli presence on the West Bank. But it indicates to me, Malcolm, the extent to which there is in the Jewish community, and maybe in the larger community to some extent, although, Malcolm, I believe this is more a symptom of what's going on in the Jewish world than the non-Jewish world. There is this feeling that in some way occupation is destroying any opportunity for the Palestinians and the Israelis to live together in peace, and that the ultimate goal is to end the occupation. I want you to respond to that in general, Malcolm.
Well, when it's somebody who is really looking for answers and doesn't just come from this as an ideological point of view, the answers are clear. You know, the PLO was created 3 years before Israel went into the West Bank in 1964.
Yes.
Boycotts of Israel began in 1945, certainly in 1948. The Arab boycott, the attempts to discriminate against Israel, the attempts to isolate Israel, when it was a fledgling state declared by the United Nations with all the legitimacy, the West Bank taken by Jordan in that war and recognized only by Pakistan and England, and then returned in a defensive war, not a war Israel initiated, and Israel became the force, the authority there. The last authority was, in fact, the Ottoman Empire. So if you want to look at historical facts, you have to look at what has happened over the years. What happened in all the negotiations, even with the offer of the administration last April, when till today, the Palestinian Authority has not responded to it. Israel did. Israel responded to every one of the offers of true negotiations. Who walked away from Camp David? Who did President Clinton say sabotaged the talks there? When Barak, when Olmert, when all of these plans came forward, who walked away? It was the Palestinians, not Israel. So you can disagree with any particular policy. You can feel that Israel shouldn't have a presence. You may not like the settlements. First, find out, where's the construction? What is Israel doing? How much of the West Bank is involved in construction? And Israel is saying, look, we're prepared to make a swap of the land. We'll exchange it. That was a principle established in earlier agreements. And Abbas each time just walks away when it comes to the bottom line because he does not want to negotiate. He does not want to have to make concessions. Israel has demonstrated with Egypt, with Jordan, and in negotiations with Arafat and with Abbas that it is prepared to do so. So we make a boogeyman out of the settlements. Is it an irritant? The international community, everybody has picked up on this issue. The construction that's going on is by and large within the footprints, the existing footprints of the settlements. Sometimes Israel's, the announcements, which are made by lower-level officials, and they're inartful, and their timing could be worse. But you got to look at the overall facts on this. And the case is very different than it is perceived to be.
Mm-hmm. In general, Malcolm, this is the first time you and I have had a chance to speak since the most recent Israeli elections. And there were all kind of predictions beforehand, and lo and behold, the results turned out to be very different. And after 6 or 7 weeks, Mr. Netanyahu was able to cobble together a coalition government of 61 seats, and we now have a new coalition government. In the process, there seems to have been one, I don't know if the word casualty is appropriate, but it's the word that comes to my mind. The casualty is that there seems to have been a greater rift between the way the American administration views the peace process and the way they perceive, the administration perceives, the way Israel and Mr. Netanyahu perceives the peace process. And there was a Camp David summit that just concluded where President Obama hosted members of the Arab League, members of the Arab states, and at the end of the summit, he gave a press conference in which the president basically was asked, where does he feel the peace process is now that Mr. Netanyahu has become reelected and will serve as the prime minister again, after the comments that the prime minister made the very last day of the elections, where he said if he became prime minister in his next term, there would be no two-state solution. The president referred to that remark and suggested that there are now people in the Israeli Knesset who are not committed to a two-state solution, and he basically sort of sent a message that it was Israel's fault that the peace process has stalled and is not moving forward. I want you to speak at the moment as you view the Israeli elections, the aftermath of the elections, and what they mean for the state of Israel going forward now, and what they mean in terms of the Israeli-American relationship, and the Prime Minister and the President of the United States. Where do you see this all going as we now begin this next phase of government in the state of Israel?
Look, if everybody was held to account for what they say in the heat of an election, and especially on a day when it looked like it was going to be a very close election, including President Obama, they would all be in trouble. Netanyahu has done everything possible to walk back the remarks, meeting with Arab leaders, saying that he didn't mean what he said. He did not get the credit he deserved when he made the speech at Bar Ilan, where he said he is committed to a two-state solution. He put in the agreement, the coalition agreement, despite, as you said, it's cobbled together with the right parties and others, the commitment to negotiations, and he has said it repeatedly since the election. Certainly there were mistakes. His comments were poorly timed and inappropriate, and he has said so. He said that he regretted what he said. But you have to look at things on the ground. For instance, about his comment about Israeli Arabs, because at the moment he thought that they were being brought to the polls, etc., in large numbers. And the fact is, though, that his government has done the most to advance the situation of Israeli Arabs, to invest in their communities, jobs, and improving the quality of life. In terms of the U.S.-Israel relationship, there were tensions before. The tensions arose with the speech at the Congress, but more importantly and more fundamentally over difference in the approach on the issue of Iran, where Israel doesn't feel that the American approach, the P5+1, is constantly moving the goalposts towards Iran. Iran stands still and increases its demands. We went from 0 centrifuges to 1,000 and now 6,000. From taking the enriched uranium out of the country to leaving it in the country, taking apart, dismantling all the facilities to leaving most of them intact. And although there are some restrictions, the fact is that, and the sanctions, they say, will stay in place. In fact, we hear that tens of billions of dollars will be made available right away. And for Israel, this is an existential issue. For America, it is a danger, a strategic danger, a security issue. For Israel, it's an existential issue, as it is for some of the Arab countries who joined at the Camp David meetings, and many of the leaders did not come because they are disappointed in the process and concerned. And they have voiced those concerns very vociferously and repeatedly. But Israel somehow takes the brunt, and there's been an unrelenting criticism and challenge to them. It's true that personal chemistry is not great. I don't know that it can be rectified, but the two countries have much too much in common. The fact is that U.S.-Israel relations in the military and security areas remains extremely strong. There are things that go on every single day between the countries. But if we project the wrong message, at one point the president made a comment about the UN resolution, and I told him that there's every reason to support Israel at the UN and not to allow a resolution that is being proposed or being muted by the French and New Zealand that would either put forward a framework for a solution or deadlines or something, but certainly putting the pressure on for negotiations. Because I said it, you have to think about how do the countries in the region look at it. And they say if Israel can't rely, if the closeness of the relationship and the American Jewish community, the ties to so many tens of millions of Americans, if they can't rely on the relationship, what chance do they have? And much more about what the fundamentals of the relationship mean, and the tensions being projected publicly hurt the interests of both countries. So the hope is that now we can put this behind, that we look at the issues, even if there are differences over Iran, how do we make sure that Iran does not go nuclear, that the region isn't further destabilized, that Israel's security isn't compromised by Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Iranian aid to them, and thinking what will happen if tens of billions of dollars are released to Iran, how much more they will do. But not just there. We saw it in South America on a recent trip. In Africa, Iran is extending its influence. And look at their statements. Khamenei himself says death to America at their Friday prayers, death to Israel, death to Jews. They do mock raids in naval exercises, bombing a mock American ship. And yet there's no consequence. We don't hold them to account for what they say, for the threats, for the violations, which continue even now of their promises and the restrictions on the nuclear program. So there's plenty of reason to be deeply concerned. Iran is a force of destabilization in the region. Look at the massive violation of human rights, the killings, the hangings, the persecution of people, its expansive role now backing the Houthis in Yemen, in Iraq, taking a greater and greater part of control in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, Sudan, even Libya. So we have much to fear about Iran at this stage, let alone them being a nuclear or potential nuclear, a threshold nuclear state. I believe the U.S.-Israel relationship will go back to and eventually everything will settle down.
Yes.
Because there's much too much at stake and both countries need it. Thank God Congress is very supportive. I think the president wants to see the relationship and certainly the prime minister wants to see the relationship restored. The new government will have to see how it functions. It's a very tenuous 61 vote majority in the Knesset. But the prime minister still sets policy. He has tried to put forward, I think, policies that would help heal some of the tensions or reduce some of the tensions that were created in the last few months. But you can't make unrealistic demands on Israel. Israel lives in a real neighborhood surrounded by real enemies. We see Hamas building tunnels. We see the Hezbollah trying to build tunnels and having now maybe 200,000 missiles, with Iran supplying them with more and more upgrades, GPS systems to guide them. And, Israel can't afford to make a mistake. Israel can't afford to have a country that threatens its existence and said that the destruction of Israel is non-negotiable, becoming a nuclear power.
It's interesting that so much of what you just said, and I appreciate it, had to do with the disappointment I've heard from everyone, having to do with the way in which the Iranian negotiations seem to have devolved. More and more people, Malcolm, are now saying to me that it's not a question of whether Iran will get a nuclear weapon, but trying to delay it as long as possible. I don't know if you would go that far, but it's certainly what I'm hearing from both American and Israeli experts in the Iranian world and the Iranian culture and U.S.-Iranian relations. And I think one of the things you said that is so to the point, Americans and American Jews do not feel in any way personally threatened. You said it was, a strategic issue for America, but for Israel, it's an existential issue. And when I speak to Israelis, to a one, they say that even though they're living their lives, they go on living their lives as if there is no danger in sight. On some level inside, they are worried about what could happen if Iran ever did get a nuclear weapon, and that's it is an issue that unites the Israeli people.
Across the political spectrum, Absolutely right. And Bougie Herzog, others have all said it, and they said this is the kind of issue that would enable them to have a unity government if if the threat level increases. But look at what they've done, surrounding Israel with the enemies and providing the weapons to them. And the Israeli people, more than 90%, reflect exactly the consensus you said. Mm-hmm. But you know what's interesting? The American people have a very large consensus on Iran as well. They don't trust them.
Right.
They don't know what the deal is because nobody knows yet what the deal will be, but they're very skeptical. They think America and the West, P5+1, has moved too close to them. They and more than half, about 60%, said they would even consider military action to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power.
Mm-hmm. All right, one more issue before I let you go. There is, it seems to me, more and more concern within American Jewry for how the State of Israel is being dealt with on college campuses, and a greater and greater fear that the BDS movement and a far-left perspective which sees Israel as a brutalizing, occupying, imperialistic, colonialistic force somehow has to be thwarted. And I spoke to somebody recently who we're going to be featuring on JBS, a former Sergeant Benjamin Anthony, who said he was speaking at Hampshire College, and that I think I have it right. The detail may be not. No, I'm sorry. He was talking about watching the J Street Conference, and at the J Street Conference, he said there were individuals who were speaking about the dismantling of the State of Israel, which evoked enormous applause from the audience. So that on the far left, especially as it expresses itself on the college campuses, there's a concern that the BDS movement, the anti-Israel movement, has gained strength. You're speaking to individuals who are intimate with this problem all the time. How do you see it?
Well, we are very involved, and we are working with the campuses, but it's not just in the campuses. And the state of Illinois just this week passed legislation by a 42-0 vote in the Senate, and also a huge majority, similar majority in the House, to oppose any kind of boycotts and divestment and doing business with companies that proclaim it. So it's not just there. It's in church groups, unions. We're seeing it manifest on the fringes of many parts, sectors of society. But the campus is always a battleground. We see it in Europe with much greater clarity because of the distance. But across America, we see these efforts, often by a small minority, and often faculties or administrations don't understand the significance. It becomes just another vote. The universities don't implement them. I don't know any campus that actually has acted on a divestment strategy. But there are some businesses that have, and it's a growing movement. It's a way of striking Israel. It's interesting that after more than 200,000 deaths in Syria, nobody's divesting from Syria. Nobody's talking about divesting from Iran when they're killing Christians, Muslims, Baha'is, and others. Nobody is talking about going after ISIS and their sponsors. And only Israel gets targeted. Israel gets targeted by the United Nations Commission on Women, singled out singularly on the same day that 30 women got elected to the Knesset.
Yes.
And we see how these messages are picked up on the campuses. And it is a real challenge. But for a small minority, they reflect what you said in terms of, an extreme left point of view or extremist point of view of any kind. The vast majority are just ignorant. Mm-hmm. They don't know the facts. You would ask them, tell me what Israel's history, tell me about what is going on in Israel. Where's the one place where the Christian population that is being decimated throughout the Middle East, the only place where it is increased sharply, where they run for the Knesset, where Arab women can serve in the government, where so many things take place, and yet they call it apartheid, they call it, and much worse. So the BDS movement is anti-Semitism by and large. When you deny a country the right to defend its citizens, the right to national self-expression uniquely, when you say we're going to boycott them, not because of a specific charge against them, but on amorphous charges, frankly, it's a way to legitimize anti-Semitism. It attacks the corporate Jew, the collective state of the collective Jew, which is the state of Israel, rather than just an individual Jew. But the purpose is the same. These efforts to diminish Israel and to deny Jews the rights accorded all other people. We see in Europe how violence against Jews has sharply increased. We've seen it here in the United States, not to the same degree yet, and hopefully it will not. And law enforcement and authority figures all agreed to fight it. But university campuses have to take more responsibility. And I recently received an honorary doctorate at a college where they had a bad incident, and I spoke first to the faculty and the administration. I said, responsibility starts at the top, and we have to see more on the parts of administrations, on the part of faculty, on the part of alumni to support students. The communities have to support them. No one should feel vulnerable. No Jewish student should fear wearing a yarmulke on a campus or speaking out for Israel on a campus. This is unacceptable.
Yes.
And people who diminish or don't understand what the significance of BDS will find out.
It is always wonderful to talk to you, Malcolm. By the way, your reference to ignorance is the scourge that is plaguing the Jewish world today. It's plaguing American Jewry. And, you have helped me from day one with this, this experiment called JBS, Shalom TV JBS, as a way of combating the lack of knowledge and the ignorance, and no one comes on and does as good a job as you, and I am so grateful for all the help. By the way, where will you be for Shavuot?
I will be here in New York.
Well, I wish you and your family a wonderful Chag Sameach, a moment to relax for you, since you're always running, and after Shavuot, then I'll come chase you again.
And but it's not a time to relax. I have to run to Mount Sinai, so it's going to be a big trek.
I'll see you there.
A spiritual one, not a physical
one
this time.
But I'll see you there, Malcolm.
Okay.
Thank you very, very much.
Bye. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Malcolm Hoenlein, the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. And again, it's all about ignorance. And by the way, one of the things that ignorance affects, or maybe better said, ignorance is in some way spawned by the media. The media can tell all kinds of untruths and lies and distortions, and we don't know enough to know what's true or what's not true. The BBC reported the story that the Pope Francis referred to Mahmoud Abbas as the angel of peace. A big story on the BBC. NBC said Pope Francis praised Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas as an angel of peace during a meeting Saturday at the Vatican that underscored the Holy See's warm relations with the Palestinians. So then the Vatican puts out the real story. Here's the real story. As is tradition with heads of state or of governments, Pope Francis presented a gift to the Palestinian leader, commenting, quote, "May the angel of peace destroy the evil spirit of war." And then the Pope said to Mahmoud Abbas, "I thought of you. May you be an angel of peace. May you be an angel of peace." It was Pope Francis's hope that one day Mahmoud Abbas would be an angel of peace. But the media reported it as if Pope Francis gave Mahmoud Abbas the seal of being the angel of peace. And whenever we hear something in the media, a little light should go off, a red flag should be waved. Don't take what the media say verbatim or as absolute truth. And I guess that would have to apply to JBS. But when you do the fact-checking, you'll find that what we're telling you about the state of Israel, the Middle East, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the Iranian threat of a nuclear weapon, you're going to be getting people who will give you the honest truth. And so it's a real honor for me to be able to host JBS and to present as much information and education to you as possible. As always, my thanks to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, the associate director of JBS, Dara Golub, and the producer of this edition of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.